Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has concluded his 6-day official visit to Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway, reaching broad consensus with Nordic leaders on stabilizing China-Europe relations, according to China's Foreign Ministry. The visits have helped push for global green transition and collaborative governance for artificial intelligence. On the latest development between China and Europe, I recently talked to Sir Robin Niblett, Warden of New College from the University of Oxford, who previously also served as director of Chatham House. Recently, we see China and EU resumed its investment and trade mechanism, likely meeting to be held in autumn. The UK, of course, still not part of the EU. So your response to that, the resumption of the mechanism?
It's good. It's necessary. The EU countries and Britain are all under severe economic stress right now. Energy prices remain elevated. Our competitiveness is affected as a result. And so China, a critical trade partner for our sales, very important for companies invested in China, selling in China and from China to the world. But unfortunately, a trade deficit of roughly 1 billion euros a day, which is politically unacceptable in Europe. But I think what they've realized in Brussels is we can't simply complain. We actually have to engage in a negotiation, in a discussion, and hoping that the fact that China is under pressure with its trade surplus, not just in Europe, but also Southeast Asia, especially America, that maybe that gives Europe a bit more leverage to engage in a proper negotiation. I'm thinking around concepts of maybe voluntary export restraints, more willingness by Chinese companies and support from the government for investment in Europe rather than simply sales to Europe. A little more partnership, 50-50, rather than maybe wholly owned subsidiaries making assemblies. So I think we're looking to try to improve that economic relationship because we really need to.
A lot of the business people I talk here, they thought it is such a pity that some of the European economies have lost the chances of attracting enough Chinese investment. Your response to that, how do we provide more confidence for business people on both sides to make things happen?
I think we have to separate out the UK from the EU on this particular question.
Yeah.
In the UK's case, the UK is an uncertain investment environment right now. We are going through yet another political transition. The terms of Brexit not yet fully resolved. You might find that amazing given we left so long ago. But the reality is that we are still trying to negotiate an improved trading relationship compared to the one that we had before. And it's going to take us some time to be able to get it properly
but
resolved.
These are critical times.
Which is incredible. But I think the change in Prime Minister will be a continuing move in the same direction. Andy Burnham, the most presumptive Prime Minister, has been very supportive of an improved relationship with the EU. And I think if you're an investor in the UK, you need to know under what terms, especially if it's a 5 to 10 year investment. So that's number one. Number two, there is a security dimension. The wind investments that you mentioned in particular, the view of parts of the British government is, like the US, that to have Chinese components tracking, because they have to inevitably, the energy needs and being tied into the grid electronically, not simply through the turbines, but the electronics and the magnets and the internet connectivity. You cannot
securitize everything.
Well, you could say the UK is still doing the Biden administration's small yard with a high fence. Yes, the UK is still trying to work out what is inside and what is outside. And for the moment, they've decided that some of the wind technology that would be provided by China, like its nuclear technology, are, I'm afraid, inside the fence, and therefore not going to be open for Chinese investment.
Having said that, though, we also see China and the US coming closer in terms of talking to each other. Since the May visit by the US president, likely there's to be another 2 to 3 rounds of close interactions at the top leadership level. So where does that leave either Brussels and especially the UK, which has been a close ally of the United States earlier, and now, of course, things have been changing.
I think the good thing to say is there is a good US-China dialogue taking place now. It's not healthy for either country or for the global economy for the two biggest economies to be fighting each other. It has spillover effects to everyone. My reading of it is the two sides need stability, but the stability is to become stronger and ideally less dependent on each other over time. America doesn't have that much that is really valuable to China that China would not rather be more self-sufficient from. Take semiconductors, one of the big areas of US sales to China, but we know the Chinese government would like to be less reliant on American semiconductors, and is slowly moving in that direction.
Export controls coming from the US toward China.
Even if the US says it's okay on one thing, the next minute there might be a new change of administration, the whole thing will change again. And America definitely...
even within the same administration, the things have been changing all the time.
It can change in an administration.
Just look at the tariffs and the export controls, investment policies, and the list goes on.
And I think the Americans have suddenly realized that being overly dependent on China for rare earth minerals and processed rare earths was a foolish dependency that they've built up. But it's going to take them a long time to fix it, so they want stability. There's also the political reason that Donald Trump has midterm elections coming, his popularity is low, inflation is relatively high, Chinese imports.
So what does that leave to the UK?
So where does this leave the UK and Europe? As I said, I think the UK and Europe are the alternative market. If you're China, you don't want to be in a negotiation with the US without the US knowing that China has alternative markets it can sell into and that it has a strong position with. The UK, as I said, is in a very particular position. It's, look, still the 6th largest economy in the world. It is growing as fast as any other struggling European economy. It is much more open to investment than other parts of Europe. It has more flexible labour markets, even under the Labour government, than other parts of Europe. And it is particularly competitive in finance, biotechnology, and digital technology in general. So I think the university sector that's there, the service sector that exists, you know, Britain is a very good place to try things out and to come and invest and see how it does. But we don't provide a doorway to the EU the way we did before, and that's the biggest problem.
But how do you think the UK could be able to make itself stand out for potential cooperative players? Of course, the degrees of cooperation can vary from time to time on different things, but how could it make itself stand out on the European continent at this moment?
The EU has Brussels and it has member states. What government will France have in a year's time after Macron? It could be the far right, it could be a centrist, we have no idea. Germany's got a coalition government that has maybe 25% support right now. Spain has a very pro-EU, pro-China government today, but who knows what kind of a government it would have if there was a change. The centre-right is much more anti-China.
So political uncertainties.
So the Brussels provides a level of certainty, and the member states then provide uncertainty. In Britain, it's all in one basket. There's no double level of complexity. What you get with Britain is what you see, which is a large economy, relatively open, good access to the US market, with a very good, as I said, technical base, a good university base. And any big company in the world has to have Britain as part of its portfolio. But what you can't do right now is sort of connect Britain with the EU the way we used to do before. In a way, it's two separate equations, I think.
One of the things people discuss ever more these days is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the key for technology development, of course, economic growth, jobs, social stability, and also about security as well. And the list goes on. But it is such a pity that on the European continent, we haven't seen yet AI power. So what does that mean for the UK, for example?
Again, there's a dance between the two parts of the UK. Let me say, first of all, for all European countries, the UK and its EU partners, we are struggling. We're struggling because AI, as you know, is many stacks. Yeah. And the first part of AI is energy. If you don't have the energy at a good price, you don't have the computing capacity. If you don't have the computing capacity, your semiconductors have nothing to run on. So the UK has some good intellectual property on semiconductors. It has some brilliant designers of AI programs and software, but our energy is expensive and limited. and our capacity to fabricate or get access to the semiconductors is limited, like the rest of Europe. So we are playing catch up, however.
And there's data, of course, there's infrastructure, and the list goes on.
So I was going to say, the UK has a slight advantage over the EU in that our data rules and data retention and data privacy are a bit more flexible than the European Union. So having left the EU, the UK is a slightly more attractive place for American companies to do some offshore data work and AI work. That's why Google DeepMind is based there and was invented there. And so you've seen all of the big US hyperscalers do their biggest investments in the UK. Now, France has Mistral, which is probably the only really scaled large language model in the European Union. And I think what the EU has that maybe the UK doesn't have is some leverage to try to force US hyperscalers to invest in Europe and bring intellectual property and bring investment physically there, because the EU is a regulator. And the thing is, those hyperscalers need the European market. They can't get into China. China's out competing them in many parts of the third world. They need Europe.
With the UK having the IPR to some of the technology you just mentioned, there is a huge limitation as to how much they could exercise that kind of liberty already obtained because of the US impact. For example, if the US say, you can't do that, you can't manufacture that, you can't export that, you can't do that, this and that. So how awkward, I'm very hesitant to use that word, but still that's an adjective probably appropriate for right now. How awkward is it that the UK has something crucial and yet still on the verge of not being able to use them?
The UK, to start our conversation, where we were earlier in our conversation, the UK is a fundamental security ally of the United States. So there are some countries in the world that are going to be able to play both sides on the technology stack. If you're Saudi Arabia maybe, or Singapore or some other countries, you will try to play both sides, and America might let you. The United States will not let Britain play both sides of the security stack. So in a way, I think Britain, maybe more than any other European country, is committed to the US. And so we will be, probably in the technology space, dependent, a contributor, and less autonomous as a result, but maybe a little more well off, because we will get the investment. So I'm afraid it's a trade-off, as we did with our nuclear weapons. France has a wholly independent nuclear weapon capability. Britain, our missiles are bought from America. We do not have a fully independent nuclear capability. So that decision was made in 1952, 53 on nuclear weapons. It's probably made today in 2026 on AI.
How much does the rhetoric framework earlier we've seen over the past few decades limit our imagination, but at the same time enriching the possibility of cooperation?
That's a very good question. Look, I come to China reasonably often, and what's being achieved here is remarkable technologically, economically. I discussed earlier, there are some fundamental imbalances, I believe, in the Chinese economy, but the Chinese leadership knows this. I'm not saying anything.
And they're working on it.
Exactly. It's not known here in Beijing. So we will be watching outside how those are worked through. But I think, as I said, the recognition is that in the world, we can't all be in one cookie-cutter system. We want to protect our system because we think it works best for us. And we need to have the imagination to know we're going to have a very, very diverse world in terms of the system of governance going forward. And that's, look, let 1,000 flowers bloom, as somebody once said.
Cultural exchanges have long anchored relations between China and Europe. Earlier, I spoke with British Ambassador to China, Peter Wilson, about the enduring legacy and impact of cultural diplomacy. He talked about how education, art, and civilizational dialogues have built resilient bridges between China and Europe. Mr. Ambassador, this is already your third time being posted as a diplomat, back in the 1990s and 2000s, and this time as ambassador. So what have you learned through these very different times interacting with China, with the Chinese people? How does that do your job and help you to find your anchor in a changing world?
It is a great question, but just very briefly on the international system. And one thing that my Prime Minister was very keen to talk about was the centrality of the United Nations in the international system. And because we support the rules-based international order, I think both leaders agreed that the UN as the centre of the international system was something very important to support. But just coming back to the question, the hard question, I was giving myself time to think, the hard question that you asked me, I think, for me, it is very nice, well, not just nice, but it's important for me to be able to have reference points that could go quite long into the past. So
back in the 1980s.
Way back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So my first trip to Beijing was in 1981. I was 13, so you can now work out how old I am. But I came in 1981 with my younger brother and with my mum and my dad. And it made an indelible impression on me. So I think what really struck me was not sort of, I mean, I went to the Temple of Heaven, went to the Forbidden City, went to the Summer Palace, all that kind of stuff. But it's actually riding on bicycles through the streets and talking to a couple of my dad's old Chinese friends way back from the 1960s. And just getting a feel for a country that was looking out to the world, just beginning to do that. It was a very exciting time, but it was so utterly different from today. And if you'd asked me then to imagine what China would be today, I would not have predicted quite how fast that would move. Cut to the 90s when I came here to study Mandarin at Duihai Jingjimaoyi Daxie in northeast Beijing. There, I think what was really interesting was just sort of like having a chance to be with Chinese students who were kind enough to speak to me in Chinese rather than their actually rather good English, and just sort of like learn what it felt like to feel on a campus. And then how to interact as a young commercial officer with people, where it took time to build trust because, you know, dealing internationally was unfamiliar. Cut to the 2007, everything was moving faster. If you didn't have something to say in meeting number one, you didn't get meeting number two. Now, cut to today, that speed is off the charts. So China's speed is a thing. People want to be practical, they want to search for solutions, they want to do stuff together. And that's what I want to do as well. It's ichi ban sha, just do stuff together. And people, you know, people have a lot of choice, there are a lot of people coming, there's a lot of interaction with China in the outside world. We just need to be really practical about where we have mutual advantages and then follow that through. And I think we have an opportunity to do that because I think honestly, there is such a big interest in the UK and China and a desire to increase our knowledge and such a strong Chinese exchange with the UK. We've just reached 1 million alumni from from British universities now back in China. That's quite something. It's a very strong base on which to build understanding.
I see you so actively interacting with Chinese from so many different walks of life, on the streets, in the schools, of course in the ministries, and also with your Chinese colleagues, and the list goes on. What does this help you to understand what the Chinese want? Who are they? How are they different or similar with you? How do they see their kids going to the UK? Or the British kids come to learn Chinese and the Chinese culture? I'm sure you already have a bank of these people, how they interact with you. Tell me more about that.
The first thing that strikes me about coming back to today's China is just the sheer diversity and variety of people, of types of things that they're interested in, and the way with the way we interact. I think the second thing is, and I think it's one of the reasons I like doing business here, is people are really practical. People cut to the chase. I quite like the bluntness. And people are polite. Respect is an important concept in Chinese culture. It's an important concept in British culture too. But behind that, I think, is just a sort of very practical desire to get things done. I love that. I think the third thing is, traveling around, you just get a really strong sense of, how different parts of China are. So China's not a concept, it's a country. And I think when you're looking from a long way away, China is a very big country, and I think it's dangerous to see China as a single thing. It is a single country, but it's a country that contains almost infinite variety, and I think sometimes we don't always see that. I actually happen to think the same about the UK, where people see things refracted through, particularly London. I'm a Scot, so I believe very, very strongly that, you know, different parts of the UK, we're a much smaller country, but different parts of the UK are also not terribly well understood overseas. What I love about the curiosity of China and the outward-looking nature of this place is there are Chinese people who've spent serious amounts of time in lots of different parts of my country. I'd like to see us doing the same in this direction.
Being pragmatic and do real things is so crucial. How precious is time for China and the UK to catch this opportunity?
So I think it's important to take opportunities when they arise, and I do think we've got momentum, and I'm very, very keen to capitalize on that. I have a really amazing team spread across this country, a huge amount of interest in the UK, very, very keen to catch that. I think at the same time, there are some things that just, you know, take a little bit of patience, and I'm very, very keen that we put in place not only sort of ability to follow up very rapidly on the opportunities that this visit has created, but also that we slowly over time build the kind of structures that allow this relationship to continue, whatever the political volatility that is happening in the world at the time. So I think both things are important, and it's important to do both at the same time. But I genuinely believe that we understand each other better by doing stuff together.
A lot of kids might be watching our conversation or excerpts of it. So many of them are studying in the UK already, and some are also willing to come to China. Any advice from an alumni, so to speak, that has been learning both cultures, and someone who is sitting in this important position trying to promote the relationship across the two sides?
So, I mean, just sort of thinking about this and trying to think about it through the eyes of my own children, I think we do live in an age of sort of information proliferation. I think it's really important. I'm actually quite impressed by young people and how they're able to filter stuff. There's much more information now than there was when I was growing up. So distinguishing between, you know, what's true and what's simply opinion, I think is really, really hard, but incredibly important. So focus on facts. I think the second thing is, in a world that is changing very rapidly, nobody's got a monopoly on predictions about the future. But if you follow what you love and you're true to who you are, that sounds very superficial, but I've really found that useful, and I notice that people who tend to be both happiest and most successful able to focus on that, what they love and who they are, and be true to their own values. And if you can do that, then I think that all of the volatility gets put into perspective.
We have been talking to members and delegates from the delegation from the UK, making of the business and the cultural representatives. Some of them have been telling me, I don't care where the political wind blows. I'm gonna be here and work with my Chinese partners because it's important for my existence, they told me, and also the development of their businesses and their career. So how do you think the government and the policymakers are really listening closely to these real voices coming from the British society and adjust policies accordingly?
I think they make a really important point. We actually don't want to politicize trade. I mean, trade is not a completely apolitical business, let's be honest, but we don't want to actively politicize trade. We want to provide a stable environment that gives confidence for our companies to trade with each other. We don't like it when there are blocks to trade. That's why we're a free trading nation. The nature and shape of our economy is built on that. And that's why we promote free trade around the world. It means we don't like barriers like tariffs. We don't love restrictions on rare earths. We want to open things up, not close them down. And I think in a global environment that is more tense and definitely becoming more complex in which to operate, it's really important for us that we just try to calm all of that down so that our businesses really can find mutual advantage. And it has to be mutual, otherwise it doesn't work. Mutual advantage in trading with each other. We think we've got a lot to offer, and we think we've got a lot to gain.
But at the same time, the public understanding of each other is so crucial.
It is.
When policymakers are making your policies, it has to be based on consensus. So how is the government, including your embassy here, trying to promote that understanding, especially in the UK society, about what is going on inside China, about the significance of these bilateral relations?
So my approach to this is not to tell people what to think, but just to give them the facts. And I think on the facts, there is so much going on here, so much that is new, so much that is driven by these very, very innovative companies who want to engage with our firms, that I like to tell those stories so that people can focus on what is possible for them. So what I want to do as an embassy is to help our people navigate what is a very different environment for them. That's really important. If we can do that, then I think we can increase the kind of mutually beneficial exchange that we've been talking about. And that's not just in trade, it's also in culture, it's also in education, it's also in pure scientific research. And I'm really proud that for our scientists, we publish more joint research papers with China than any other country in the world other than the United States. That's really important for our scientists, and it's exciting. What I really hope now in this next phase is that, actually partly also thanks to visa-free access, great thing, that more people come in this direction to see for themselves. We have a large number of Chinese people who are actually either studying in or working in the UK. We want more people to come in this direction to see for themselves. It's about seeing the whole elephant.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. Thanks for being with me. Bye for now.